But let's talk about Assata. I know that's why a lot of us are here tonight. Many were shocked by the May 2nd announcement that the FBI had added Black liberation leader Assata Shakur to their most wanted terrorist list. Well, I should say we were shocked but not surprised. We know from looking at history up through the headlines today that the FBI has always targeted and attacked progressive political movements in the United States, from the Communist Party to Martin Luther King to anti-war organizers and the Occupy movement today. Any movement that organizes oppressed people, any movement that indicts the oppressors, and any leaders, especially Black leaders or people of color who talk about revolution, can be targeted. The FBI announcement occurred on the 40th anniversary of the shootout in which Assata was shot multiple times by the New Jersey police and was subsequently accused of killing a police officer. She is the first woman to be placed on the most wanted terrorist list, and additionally, the state of New Jersey has put a $2 million bounty on her head. In response to the news about that bounty, author Alice Walker eloquently and righteously expressed disgust that, quote, the US government can now offer $2 million for the capture of a very small, not young Black woman who was brutally abused, even shot, over 3 decades ago, as if we don't need that money to buy people food, clothes, medicine, and decent places to live. So why is the US government offering this bounty? It's clear that these are the vindictive attempts of the empire, still outraged that a rebel could escape, survive outside its reach, and continue to expose its long history of exploitation and oppression. The recent provocations are part of a long-term smear campaign by the US government to erase her revolutionary legacy. The FBI accusations target Shakur as an individual, but the labeling of her as a terrorist is an attack on all revolutionaries. Shakur has been living in exile in Cuba for the last 29 years. So what changed in the recent days and weeks to now put her on the most wanted terrorist list? The FBI presented no evidence against her and revealed no terrorist plots. Assata's real crime, FBI spokesman Aaron Ford said, was that from Cuba she continues to, quote, maintain and promote her ideology and provides anti-US government speeches espousing the Black Liberation Army message, an ideology and message that the US government has declared terrorism now. And what is this message she's carrying? You know, I thought that it's extremely important when writing this talk to give you a sense of the political views that Assata is being persecuted for, why her voice alone is such a threat to the empire. Has anyone here read Assata Shakur's autobiography? Anyone else? Everyone should read it. Go out and get it. It's free online. I've got it upstairs on the computer. If you just Google Assata Shakur autobiography, free PDF, you can find the whole thing. It's fantastic. I read it when I was 19, and it really spoke to me as a young Black woman. You know, she's so brutally honest about the oppression that she experienced growing up, her changing views of the world, how love for her people and for the revolution developed in her as she learned more and had more experiences. It's a beautiful book. And it's very popular with young people, with women, with people of color, because she tells her story and the story of a people, of an era, the story of an oppressed person learning that the source of their oppression is in the system, and the system must be overthrown. In a chapter recounting her early education, she says, quote, I wanted to be an American just like any other American. I wanted a piece of America's apple pie. I believed that we could get our freedom just by appealing to the consciences of white people. I believed that America was a really good country, like my teacher said in school, quote, the greatest country on earth. I grew up believing that stuff, really believing it, and now, 20-odd years later, it seems like a bad joke. Nobody in the world, nobody in history, has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who are oppressing them. Those who believe that the president or the vice president and Congress and the Supreme Court run this country are sadly mistaken. The almighty dollar is king. Those who have the most money control the country and through campaign contributions buy and sell presidents, congressmen, and judges. The ones who pass the laws and enforce the laws that benefit their benefactors. The rich have always used racism to maintain their power. In one section, she talks about how she admired the courageousness of the Black civil rights activists who pursued nonviolence, but how she differed. She said that she herself could never endure being spit on by a white man without fighting back. This is reflective of a widespread shift in consciousness amongst many Black youth at that time, you know, as the 60s gave way to the 70s, and the struggle went beyond civil rights and became one for Black liberation. You know, they often in the media, she's portrayed as some sort of violent, white people-hating criminal because of her belief in self-defense. In her own words, she wrote, quote, a war between the races would help nobody and free nobody and must be avoided at all cost. But a one-sided race war with Black people as the targets and white people shooting the guns is worse. We would be criminally negligent if we do not deal with racism and racist violence, and if we do not prepare to protect ourselves against it. Her worldview was shaped by the movement that she became a part of. In the turbulent late 60s, there was so much political activity and so many political groups. Of encountering communist activists for the first time, she writes, quote, "We're taught at such an early age to be against the communists, yet most of us don't have the faintest idea what communism is. Only a fool lets someone else tell him who the enemy is. Never let your enemies choose your enemies for you." She writes a great deal about the politics of the Black Panther Party, and I think there's some really valuable history of the Black Panther Party in that book. And it's the ideology she's most closely associated with. I'm only going to include one line, but I think this line points out why the U.S. government still considers the ideology of the Black Panther Party a threat to this day. About what they believed, and Assata wrote, "One of the most important things that the party did was to make it really clear who the enemy was. Not white people, but the capitalistic, imperialist oppressors." So those are her ideas. This is the ideology that President Obama and Eric Holder and the FBI has labeled terrorist. They are charging Shakur with a political crime, making it so the advocacy of ordinary revolutionary politics and Black liberation can now officially be called terroristic and criminal. This has extremely dangerous implications for Assata and for those who think like her. According to the outrageous war on terror legal doctrines currently employed in Washington, she could be targeted for assassination. In addition, the designation of Shakur as a terrorist helps them justify the targeting of socialist Cuba as a, quote, state sponsor of terrorism. If we are scared off by this designation, then the forces of reaction win. We must defend Assata Shakur, and we must demand hands off our sister Assata. The defense of Assata Shakur is part and parcel of a general defense of the right to espouse revolutionary politics, of Black liberation, and of free speech. Our right to exist as individuals who challenge the system that oppresses us, and as an organization of people working to change that system is at stake. So let's talk a little about the life of this inspiring revolutionary hero. Assata Shakur was born Joanne Chesimard, and her change in name was reflective of her desire to fully identify with the revolutionary struggles of her African heritage. Assata means she who struggles. Her middle name, Olugbala, means love for the people. And her last name, Shakur, was taken in honor of her comrade Zaid Shakur. And because this is the West Coast, I must mention that yes, she is the step-aunt and godmother of Tupac Shakur. It is no surprise that the US government now seeks to further criminalize Assata. In fact, it is just the latest extension of the government's counter-revolutionary COINTELPRO initiative waged against the Black liberation movement in the 1960s and 70s. At that time, the US government was so fearful of the growth of the revolutionary movement that J. Edgar Hoover even declared the Black Panther Party the, quote, greatest internal threat facing the oppressive, racist ruling class. It used a wide range of tactics, all the way to assassination of leaders to disrupt this radical movement. It must be recalled that the government described much of the political activity of the era in the anti-war movement, the Black freedom movement, the fight for independence for Puerto Rico, and solidarity to revolutionary Cuba, amongst other struggles, as explicitly criminal at that time. Of course, while they were locking up and killing activists and revolutionaries within this country, the US government was engaged in a wide-ranging, brutal, and murderous campaign in Southeast Asia. They were dealing cosmetically with the terrible conditions of poverty and class oppression inside the US, while deploying troops to suppress growing rebellions amongst oppressed Black, Latino, and Native people. The US government was launching coups in multiple nations. They were attempting and sometimes succeeding in assassinating revolutionary leaders of other countries. They were backing apartheid and Portuguese colonialism in Africa. When Martin Luther King Jr. famously said that the US government was, quote, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, he laid bare the essence of the American century. It was in this world context, which in its core features is really unchanged today, that Assata Shakur grew up. Millions took part in the growing movements against the injustices of the US government, and Shakur was one of those millions. As a college student, she did not use her degree as an escape valve to distance herself from the mass of poor, oppressed, and exploited people. Instead, she joined, body and soul, in the fight for our collective liberation. Out of the mass movement in the United States in that time, a wing advocated for various forms of armed struggle as a way to boost the revolutionary movement and give solidarity to the peoples of the Third World. One outgrowth of this trend was the formation of the Black Liberation Army, a group that Assata has been associated with. Of the BLA, Assata says, quote, the idea of the Black Liberation Army emerged from conditions in the Black communities, conditions of poverty, indecent housing, massive unemployment, poor medical care, and inferior education. The idea came about because Black people are not free or equal in this country, because 90% of the men and women in this country's prisons are Black and Third World, because 10-year-old children are shot down in our streets, because dope has saturated our communities, preying on the disillusionment and frustrations of our children. The concept of the BLA arose because of the political, social, and economic oppression of Black people in this country. And where there is oppression, there will be resistance. The BLA is part of that resistance movement. The Black Liberation Army stands for freedom and justice for all people. So Assata was a part of this trend, and she and her comrades, because of this, were targeted for severe oppression, harassed, often framed, and jailed under false pretenses. It's important to understand that the crimes that they're accusing her of, that Assata Shakur is not guilty. Shakur was falsely convicted of having killed an officer on May 2nd, 1973. While driving on the New Jersey Turnpike, Assata Shakur, Zaid Shakur, and Sundiata Akoli were stopped by state troopers who said they had a faulty taillight. I'm sure that's why they stopped them. A shootout ensued where one state trooper killed Zaid Shakur and another trooper, Warner Foster, ended up dead. Shakur was charged with both murders despite the fact that the other trooper, James Harper, admitted that he killed Zaid Shakur. Assata had been following police instructions. She was standing with her hands in the air when she was shot by Trooper Harper more than once, including a bullet to the back. Trooper Harper lied and said that he had seen Shakur reach for a gun, a claim he later took back. He later recanted that claim. He also claimed she had been in a firing position, something a surgeon who examined her said was anatomically impossible at the time. The same surgeon said it was anatomically necessary for her arms to have been raised for her to receive the bullet wound she did. Tests done by the police found that Shakur had not fired a gun, and no physical or medical evidence was presented by the prosecution to back up their claim that she had fired a gun at Trooper Harper. While she was in trial proceedings, the state attempted to pin 6 other serious crimes on her, alleging she carried out bank robberies, kidnappings, attempted killings. She was acquitted 3 times. 2 were dismissed, and 1 resulted in a hung jury. Shakur was put on trial in a county where, because of pretrial publicity, 70% of people thought she was guilty, and she was judged by an all-white jury. Without any physical evidence to present, the prosecution had to rely totally on false statements and innuendo aimed at playing up the prejudices of the jury pool against Black people, against political radicals, and Black revolutionaries in particular. Finally, after years behind bars, the state finally was able to secure a conviction in the Turnpike shooting. What happened next, I think, was best described by Alice Walker, who met Assata in Cuba many years later. Alice Walker wrote, quote, "Though shot in the back with her arms raised, she managed to live through 2 years of solitary confinement in a men's prison, chained to her bed. Then, in what must surely have been a miraculous coming together of people of courageous compassion, she was helped to escape and find refuge in Cuba." There aren't really a lot of details of her escape to Cuba available, probably for good reason, though I think it's important to point out that it was a network of radicals, including white radicals, that made her escape possible. Assata was welcomed in revolutionary Cuba, a country whose leadership has embraced anti-racism and revolution. Assata has resided in Cuba for the last 29 years. In her own words, quote, "I am a 20th century escaped slave." Just as the US targets Cuba, a country that dared throw out the imperialists, the racists, the capitalist oppressors, they must also target Assata, who somehow escaped the brutality of their prison system and lived and continues to expose their crimes. The US ruling class is afraid of Assata, and they're afraid of Cuba, because they both stand as testaments to the fact that the empire can be resisted. You don't have to play by the rules, you can fight the system and survive. Being placed on this most wanted terrorist list means that hypothetically, Shakur could be targeted for assassination. The legal white paper released by the Obama administration around the confirmation of CIA Director John Brennan stated the United States would pay no attention to another nation's sovereignty in choosing targets who they deem to be terrorists. The massive expansion of the security powers and the methods used in the war on terror are being fashioned in this way to target revolutionary militants. Placing Shakur on the most wanted terrorist list is also a significant attack on Cuba. On May 1st, 2013, the United States refused to remove Cuba from the state sponsors of terrorism list. The next day, Assata became a most wanted terrorist. By claiming that Cuba supports terrorism and is harboring a terrorist, the government provides itself with a pretext to continue the illegal blockade of Cuba and starve the revolution of trade. Further, the United States does absolutely nothing to apprehend, convict, or punish in any way the violent anti-Cuba groups who routinely and openly boast from US soil of planning terrorist attacks on Cuba. Despite having killed thousands of Cubans, none of these organizations or individuals have ever been placed on the list of America's most wanted terrorists. For instance, Luis Posada Carriles, a former CIA operative who currently walks free in Miami, publicly admitted to the New York Times that he had engaged in a campaign of fatal hotel bombings in Cuba. In 1976, Posada was a key figure in the bombing of a Cuban airliner where 73 people were killed. In 2000, Posada was caught attempting to set up a plot to assassinate Fidel Castro as he spoke to university students in Panama. If successful, the attack the way he planned it would have killed hundreds. And yet he's allowed to reside in the US or remain free, while Assata, who has been in Cuba for the last 29 years, is targeted. Ominously, by criminalizing Assata Shakur, the government has also taken a step towards criminalizing the broader movement in support of political prisoners. Many political prisoners in the country have been alleged to be members of the Black Liberation Army. If Shakur is a terrorist simply for giving speeches in support of them, what about those convicted of crimes alleged to have taken place while they were members? Will political prisoner support groups now be targeted as supporters of terrorism or terrorists themselves? The new attacks on Shakur aim to have a chilling effect on those who seek to express their support for political prisoners. This is especially true when one considers that drone strikes and indefinite detention at Guantanamo Bay are typical US responses to those accused of terrorism. The placement of Assata Shakur on the most wanted terrorist list is another example that the US government and the capitalist class represents will go to any length to intimidate, repress, and defeat potential threats. Because Shakur remains a symbol of resistance and is unrepentant in her politics, the government will never stop in their attempts to smear, kidnap, or kill her. But millions of people know the truth. Her legacy cannot be whitewashed or dismissed. It cannot be distorted. So even though she is in Cuba, the government remains afraid of her example. They know that while decades have passed, the conditions still exist to give birth to 1 million Assata Shakurs, and those will carry on the struggle. Thank you.